Good morning, boys and girls. Today for our read aloud, I'm going to read you a book called Fabulous Frogs. Now, this book was written by the author Martin Jenkins, and it was illustrated by Tim Hopgood. So it says that illustrated by, that means he was the illustrator. He drew the pictures. Let's read Fabulous Frogs. Ooh, what are those? Those are eggs and tadpoles. Oh, and look, there's little frogs. Did you know there are more than 5,000 kinds of frogs? Each one is different, but they have some things in common. All frogs have short bodies, big back legs, smaller front legs, and no tail. Almost all of them can jump, but some can only manage short hops. They eat small animals like snails, slugs, worms, beetles, and flies. Frogs do some of their breathing through their skin, and they usually live in damp places. Most kinds are found in warm parts of the world where it rains a lot. The ones that live where the winter is cold, like much of the North America and Europe, hibernate and come out in spring to breed. Almost all frogs lay eggs, usually in ponds or streams. They hatch into tadpoles with tails and no legs. They don't look anything like their parents. Look, they start out as a tadpole, and then they grow to a frog. Look at that tail disappear. As a tadpole grows older, its tail begins to shrink, and it starts to sprout back and front legs. Eventually, the tail disappears, and the tadpole becomes a tiny frog. Fabulous frogs. This frog is huge for a frog. It's a Goliath frog. It lives in Western Africa. It's the biggest frog in the world. Sometimes it eats other frogs. Whoa. These frogs are tiny. This is the smallest kind of frog in the world, or at least the smallest that anyone knows about. It lives in Papua New Guinea. And this one has a very strange nose. It's called Darwin's Frog, and it lives in South America. No one really knows why it has a pointy nose. This frog can, whoops, jump really far really quickly. It's a striped rocket frog from Australia. Why do you think it's called a striped rocket frog? It has stripes on his back. And I think it's probably called a rocket frog because it can jump really high, really fast. It can jump 16 feet. Whoa! 16 feet? That's taller than most of our ceilings. Very handy for escaping from enemies in a hurry. And these ones make an awful lot of noise. Ribbit, rock, 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 chirp. Frogs call to let other frogs know they are there. These are all male frogs. Female frogs are generally much quieter. The big one in the middle is a bullfrog. That's the one we hear go. This one is called a flying frog. Whoa, look at its little hands. They're very webbed, almost like a kite. It can catch the wind. It's called a flying frog, although it can't really fly. It glides after it hops. It lives in trees and forests in Southeast Asia. It spreads out its skin between its toes to help it float in the air when it jumps from tree to tree. Ew, this one looks like it has hair on it. This one is called a hairy frog, although it doesn't have any real hair, like my hair or your hair. The hairy frog lives in Western Africa. The things that look like hairs are little strips of skin. They probably help the frog breathe when it's underwater. I think these frogs are all very beautiful. I couldn't tell you which one is the most beautiful, but I can tell you that each one could kill a horse, though only if the horse was silly enough to try to eat it. Ooh, these are poisonous frogs. A horse wouldn't eat a frog on purpose, but plenty of other animals might. South American poison arrow frogs have deadly poison in their skin to help protect them. Their bright colors are a way of saying, stay away. These frogs make a nest of foam for their eggs. And the one with the very strange nose looks after its babies in its throat. I don't know if you can see that, but there's little eggs in his throat. Look at that. Instead of laying them on trees or in water, this one laid them and then holds it in its throat. That's pretty interesting. And this is the dad frog. This frog never leaves the water. It's an African clawed frog. It spends most of its life in the pond. And this frog can live buried in the ground for years and years, waiting for the rain. I wonder if this one lives in a desert. It's an Australian water-holding frog. It lives in the desert. Do you know why I thought that? It lives underground for years and years because in the desert it doesn't rain very much. It waits for water to fill up its hole and then it comes out. And in the desert it doesn't rain very often. That's why it can stay down there for years and years. It makes a little room for itself where it stays cool and damp. When it rains and the ground gets wet, the frog can dig itself out. All these frogs are wonderful, but my favorite frog of all is the medium-sized greeny browny one that sits on a lily pad in my backyard pond. All right, and there's all of the different frogs we talked about. Now, one thing I've noticed about Clovis is that there are a lot of frogs toward the summertime. Sometimes I'll water my garden during the day and I won't see any frogs. And then I go to turn my sprinkler off at night and there are frogs everywhere. And I thought to myself, why do they only come out at night? And then I thought, it gets really hot during the day. And their skin is pretty thin. And they like to be under my garden. So I'm thinking that the frogs like to stay nice and cool under my soil in my garden. And then it's nice and cool and I water it a lot so it's nice and damp for them. And then when it gets nighttime, it's nice and cool again. And I turn my sprinkler on at night so they like to be in the grass. So I want you, as it gets closer to summer, to look and see if you can find any frogs. I know that frogs start out as eggs, so I wonder if there are any eggs around here right now. Maybe you can go look for some. Remember, they like to be in cool, damp places outside. So why don't you go on an adventure and maybe try to find some? All right, bye-bye, friends.